Tonight's story is slow. It's quiet. It's meant to unravel gently, without urgency, without noise. For the next 2 hours, you'll be listening to the myths of Heracles. 12 labors set before a man who didn't ask for greatness, but carried it anyway. There won't be battles or shouting here, not in the way the old songs remember. Just movement, distance, the sound of footsteps through dust, wind through trees, and a body learning to endure. Each labor is part of the same long breath, one trial easing into the next. This story isn't here to excite. It's here to soothe, to give your mind something steady to follow, while the rest of you begins to drift. And if you'd like, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's strangely comforting knowing that someone is lying awake 1,000 miles away, listening to the same voice at the same time. The fire is quiet. The world is still. And somewhere out there, someone else is breathing slower too. This is the story of Heracles, son of Zeus, born to a mortal woman named Alcmene, in a moment shaped by deception. Zeus took the form of her husband, and from that union came a child who would be marked before he ever opened his eyes. Hera, wife of Zeus, goddess of marriage and vengeance, saw the child not as a boy, but as a reminder of betrayal. Her punishment was not swift. It was patient, and it would shape his life from beginning to end. Even in infancy, Heracles was not safe. One night, Hera sent 2 serpents to his crib. The child did not cry. He reached out with small hands and crushed them. The household whispered. Word spread. Gods watched. He grew strong, quickly. His teachers admired his natural ability, but feared his temper. He trained with the best: swordsmanship, archery, music, philosophy. But Heracles didn't fit into the world of calm instruction. He was too large, too intense, too close to something wild. One day, in a moment of frustration, he struck his music teacher and killed him. It wasn't malice, just too much strength, too little control. As he grew older, Heracles married. He had children, a home, a life of simple shape. But Hera was still watching. And one day, she struck. Madness came over him like fog, and when it lifted, the bodies of his wife and sons lay at his feet. No one told him what he had done. He remembered every movement, every cry. He left the city, walked into the wilderness, and when he could no longer carry the weight of what he had done, he turned to the oracle at Delphi. Her voice was neither cruel nor gentle. It simply told him the path. 12 labors, 12 acts of service to the king of tyrants. Complete them, and perhaps the stain on his soul might lighten. The king, Eurystheus, was small in every way that Heracles was great. He feared him, hid when he arrived, issued commands from behind doors. But the gods had made their will clear, and Heracles obeyed. The first labor took him to the dry hills of Nemea, where a lion had made the region unlivable. Travelers disappeared. Farmers abandoned their fields. The creature's hide was said to be impervious to blades, its eyes glowing like coals, its body silent as death. Heracles brought with him only a bow, a club, and a calm mind. He followed claw marks and broken bones to a cave in the hillside. Inside, it was warm, damp, breathing. The lion stood in shadow, larger than any he had imagined. When Heracles loosed an arrow, it bounced. His blade shattered on the creature's back. The club cracked against its skull. So he let go of his weapons, and with nothing but his arms, he lunged. The struggle was long. They rolled in dust and dark. The lion clawed, tore, bit. Heracles held tight, shifting his grip again and again until the breath left the beast's body for the last time. He sat for a while, beside it, covered in blood and dirt and silence. Later, when he tried to skin it, no blade worked. In frustration, he took one of the lion's claws and with careful hands slowly separated hide from flesh. He wore the skin when he returned to Tiryns, not as a trophy, but as armor, and Eurystheus, seeing him from afar, was so frightened that he ordered all future tasks be delivered from behind high walls. The second labor took him to the swamps of Lerna. There, in a place where the air hung heavy with rot, lived a creature with many heads, a hydra. Cut one off, and two would grow in its place. Heracles fought with sword and fire. His nephew, Iolaus, joined him. Each time a head was severed, Iolaus burned the stump, sealing it. One head remained, immortal, snarling, hissing curses in no tongue known to men. Heracles crushed it beneath a stone and buried it deep in the earth. The marsh was silent again. But the silence didn't feel like victory. It felt like what came after, like the end of the beginning. 10 Labors. The first labor brought Heracles to the valley of Nemea, where the hills were bare and the silence was heavy. There had once been villages here, stone homes with open courtyards and fields lined with olive trees. But those homes were empty now. The people had gone, or been taken, and the valley had returned to the stillness of unclaimed land. Something prowled here. Not a god, not a ghost, but a lion. Not ordinary, though none dared look closely enough to see the difference. They said its hide could not be pierced, that arrows turned like breath against it, that it killed not out of hunger, but out of fury. It moved like a shadow and left nothing behind. Heracles walked into the valley with no companions, no fanfare. The sun was low when he entered the creature's territory, and for a time, all he heard was the dry hiss of wind in tall grass and the soft clack of stones beneath his sandals. The cave was not hard to find. Bones littered the entrance, long bleached by sun, but unmistakable. He did not pause. He stepped inside. The lion was waiting, larger than he expected. Its fur seemed burnished, like metal in firelight. Its eyes held no fear, no curiosity, just recognition, as if it had known from the beginning that this meeting was inevitable. Heracles drew his bow. The arrow flew, struck, and fell. He drew another. Same result. The hide did not yield. He advanced with his sword, and the blade shattered against the creature's shoulder. The lion did not roar. It moved. Fast. He dodged. The force of it knocked him to the cave wall. His club, thick and knotted from oak, cracked across the lion's back and split down the middle. So he let everything fall. And he moved forward, bare-handed. The fight was not clean. They grappled in dust and dark, in silence and blood. The lion clawed, tore, bit. Heracles held. Again and again, he adjusted his grip. Again and again, the beast tried to twist free. But Heracles endured, until the lion's body stilled and the cave fell silent again. He sat with it for a time. No one would see. No crowd would cheer. Only him and the thing he had overcome. Later, he tried to skin it, but no knife would cut the hide. He tried flint, obsidian, even heat. Nothing worked. In the end, it was the lion's own claws that did it. Slowly, patiently, he separated the hide and draped it across his shoulders. When he returned to Tiryns, Eurystheus did not greet him. The king watched from a tower and sent word from behind stone. From that day forward, all future commands were given through messengers. The sight of Heracles, silent, bloodied, wearing the lion's pelt, was more than the king had expected, or wanted. The second labor sent him to Lerna, where a swamp sprawled thick with fog and rot. People in nearby villages spoke of a serpent with too many heads, of shrieking in the night, and water that boiled when it breathed. The creature had made its nest at the center of the marsh, where reeds grew taller than men, and the ground shifted with every step. This was the Hydra. 9 heads, or 12, or more. None could agree. But they all said the same thing. Cut off one, and 2 would grow in its place. Its breath was poison. Its blood ate through bronze. No one had come back. Heracles took his nephew, Iolaus, not as a warrior, but as a witness. They rode until the trees thinned, until the road dissolved into sludge. They made torches of resin-soaked pine, and Heracles wrapped cloth around his mouth. The Hydra met them not with surprise, but with hunger. Its heads rose from the mire like 6 stars. Its body stretched through the reeds, a low hiss vibrating in the water. Heracles struck fast, slicing one head clean. 2 more erupted from the wound. He cut again. More grew. So Iolaus stepped forward, fire in hand. Each time Heracles severed a head, Iolaus burned the stump, sealing the wound shut before it could multiply. The Hydra thrashed, its tails crashing through trees. The ground split beneath them, but one by one, the heads were lost. All but one, the central head, ancient and immortal, snapping in silence. Heracles crushed it beneath a boulder. The body spasmed once, then sank. The marsh swallowed the noise. He dipped his arrows in the creature's blood. They smoked where the tips touched it, but did not melt. No one had told him to do that. No one knew what it would mean. The air smelled of ash and rot. Heracles said nothing, just turned back toward the road. Behind him, the swamp grew still. Nothing moved. He would not return as he came. And the next task waited, quiet and closer. The third labor Heracles was given didn't involve monsters, not exactly. No claws, no poison, no teeth that glowed in the dark. Just a deer, a very fast, very pretty deer, with golden antlers and bronze hooves, said to be sacred to Artemis herself. It lived in the forests of Arcadia, slipping through trees and across rivers so lightly it never left more than a whisper behind. No one could catch it. That was the point. But Eurystheus had commanded it. Heracles must bring the Ceryneian hind back alive. No injury, no tricks. Just catch it and carry it home. So Heracles set off into the woods with a rope and his bow, though he didn't intend to use either just yet. The deer was shy, and it had every right to be. It was fast enough to vanish before the echo of a snapped twig finished bouncing between the trees. Heracles wasn't in a hurry. He followed the hind slowly, never chasing, just keeping it in sight when he could. Days passed, then weeks. It became something of a strange companionship, one step removed. The hind always ahead, always watching. He learned its rhythm, the way it moved through the forest, where it drank, where it paused. After nearly a year, during a quiet morning when fog clung low to the moss, Heracles saw the deer standing beside a spring. Its head was lowered, antlers outlined in the first light of dawn. He approached slowly, whispering something soft, and slipped a rope around its neck. The deer didn't bolt. It had grown used to him. Maybe it was tired. Maybe it was curious. But before he could turn away, a new stillness filled the forest, and Artemis appeared. She didn't shout. She didn't draw her bow. She just looked at him, and then at the deer. Heracles explained as calmly as he could that he hadn't harmed it, and that it would be returned. She studied him for a long moment and then vanished, deer and all. That was enough. The labor was done. The fourth labor was less subtle. Heracles was told to find the Erymanthian boar, a creature with tusks the length of forearms and a temperament that leaned toward aggressive. It lived on a snowy mountain and enjoyed smashing things: trees, fences, people. Heracles put on his lion-skin cloak and headed north. Finding the boar wasn't hard. The sound of it crashing through the trees echoed across the ridges like a thunderclap. Heracles followed the trail: mud, broken branches, the occasional overturned boulder. The trick wasn't in locating the boar. It was in stopping it. When he finally spotted it, Heracles didn't try to wrestle the beast right away. He led it higher, into the deeper snow where even the boar had to slow down. There, it lost momentum, and when it charged again, Heracles sidestepped, grabbed its tusks, and pushed. The boar stumbled, fell, and before it could thrash too much, Heracles had it bound with thick rope. He returned to Tiryns with the animal dragging behind him through the snow, legs tied neatly, huffing and snorting. When Eurystheus saw it, he panicked and did what Eurystheus often did: leapt into a large jar and shouted his approval from inside. That was 4. The fifth labor, however, seemed less like a heroic test and more like a particularly unpleasant prank. Heracles was told to clean the stables of King Augeas. On the surface, that might have seemed simple, but these weren't ordinary stables. They housed thousands of cattle, divine cattle at that, and they hadn't been cleaned in decades. The smell alone was enough to make entire towns keep their windows shut. The king, of course, believed the job was impossible. But Heracles had an idea. Instead of trying to shovel his way through mountains of filth, he examined the terrain. 2 rivers flowed nearby, both strong, both conveniently placed. With a bit of digging and some stonework, he redirected their waters straight through the stables, washing out decades of filth in just a few hours. By sunset, the stables were spotless. The walls gleamed. The cattle looked mildly confused. Augeas, however, wasn't pleased. He had promised Heracles a reward if he completed the job in a day, but now he refused to pay, claiming Heracles had cheated. Heracles didn't argue. He wiped his hands, nodded once, and walked away. Later, there would be a reckoning between them, but that would be a story for another time. So that made 5. 5 tasks completed. Heracles had wrestled lions and deer, boars and rivers. He had tricked terrain and tangled with deities. Still, no feast awaited him. No crown, no song, just a few more labors, and a long road ahead. The fifth labor, though lacking the ferocity of monsters or the peril of war, would test Heracles in a different way, through disgust, ingenuity, and pride. He was sent to the kingdom of Elys, where King Augeas had for years refused to clean the stables that housed his divine herds. These were not ordinary animals. Cattle gifted by the gods stood in endless rows, their hides shimmering faintly with celestial sheen, their hooves worn smooth from pacing on filth-laden stone. The stables had not been cleaned in over 3 decades. Manure was piled high, fermenting beneath the roof beams, leaking into the soil. The stench clung to the wind and choked travelers before they reached the gates. It was a place forgotten by care, immune to shame. When Heracles arrived, Augeas scoffed. He was not an evil man, but he was proud and cunning. He laughed at the notion that one man could clean the stables in a single day, and seeing an opportunity to humiliate the famed hero, he offered Heracles a wager. If the job was done before sundown, he would grant him 1/10 of the herd. Heracles, never one to reject fair terms, accepted, but insisted that Augeas' own son and a group of elders witness the agreement. The king, still amused, agreed. Heracles did not enter the stables with a broom or shovel. He did not stoop to scoop filth from straw. Instead, he studied the land. 2 rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, ran near the city, untapped, slow-moving veins of the earth. With strength and calculation, Heracles carved deep trenches through rock and hill, redirecting the waters toward the stable walls. The earth split beneath his hands, and the water came rushing like a beast uncaged, tearing through the halls of filth, carrying away years of decay in a single thunderous current. Cattle bellowed in alarm, but none were harmed. The sun arced across the sky, and by dusk the stables stood rinsed and gleaming, their floors as clean as they had been when the gods first gifted the herd to Augeas. But pride recoiled when confronted with a fulfilled promise. Augeas, learning that this task had been assigned by Eurystheus, refused to honor the agreement. He claimed Heracles had acted under obligation, not contract, and therefore deserved nothing. At the tribunal that followed, Heracles presented the witnesses. Augeas's own son stood in defense of the hero's word, declaring the agreement just and binding. For his honesty, the boy was exiled, along with Heracles. Eurystheus, hearing of the work, refused to count the labor among the 12, on the grounds that Heracles had sought reward. Yet the people of Elys would remember. They would speak of rivers that ran through barns, of filth washed away not with hands, but with will. Heracles left the land not with cattle, but with a reputation stronger than gold. The 6th labor carried him north, to the wilds of Arcadia and the marshes of Stymphalus. These wetlands were veiled in fog and filled with long reeds that hissed when brushed, the air thick with damp and rot. It was here that the Stymphalian birds had taken roost, monstrous creatures with iron beaks and bronze feathers. They did not merely feed, they slaughtered. Their wings beat like war drums, and when they rose into the air, their metallic feathers loosed like javelins, piercing shields and splitting bone. Crops failed, villages emptied. The land waited, breath held in fear of sky. Heracles approached not with sword drawn, but with a gift from the forge of Hephaestus, a pair of bronze crotala, clappers forged with divine resonance. When struck, they did not echo. They shattered silence. Atop a ridge, Heracles raised the clappers and smashed them together. The sound was unnatural, as though the sky had cracked. From the reeds, the birds rose in panic, their wings slicing the mist, eyes burning like coals. Heracles did not hesitate. He notched arrows to his bow and loosed them in rhythm, each shot felling one of the screeching monsters. Their bodies dropped into the marsh, heavy with metal and blood. Those that escaped did not return. The flock was broken, their sanctuary dissolved. The reeds swayed in the breeze once more, and the silence that followed was gentle, no longer forced. Heracles did not tarry. He moved on, leaving behind a marsh where frogs croaked again, and wind stirred leaves instead of wings. The villagers returned slowly, as though waking from a long nightmare. Heracles left no monument, no warning, only stillness, only sky. The 7th labor carried Heracles across the sea to Crete, where a bull of divine origin raged through fields and villages, untamable and unyielding. Once a gift from Poseidon, it had been sent to King Minos as a token of favor, a creature of immense beauty intended for sacrifice. But Minos, captivated by the bull's magnificence, defied the god and spared it. Offended, Poseidon cursed the beast, filling it with a madness that burned through its veins like wildfire. It trampled crops, tore through vineyards, and left entire settlements in ruins. The people lived in constant fear, their lives bending around the storm that never slept. Heracles arrived not with noise or fury, but with quiet resolve. He did not try to track the bull by scent or footprint. Instead, he listened. The ground bore memory in its tremors, and it was from a hilltop that Heracles first glimpsed the animal. Its white hide gleamed in the sun, and steam rose from its nostrils with every breath. It pawed the earth as if challenging the very island beneath it. Heracles approached slowly, arms open, not in invitation, but in understanding. When the bull noticed him, it charged, a blur of muscle and fury. Heracles sidestepped the first pass and, in one smooth motion, leapt onto its back. The struggle was immense. The bull reared, twisted, and bucked, its hooves striking stone, its horns slicing the air. But Heracles held on, his grip unwavering. He wrapped his arms around the bull's neck, not to choke, but to still. Slowly, impossibly, the beast began to tire. Its movements dulled, its rage burned low, and at last it stopped. Heracles slid from its back, bound its legs with rope, and led it calmly through the countryside. The people watched from windows and doorways, awed not by violence, but by control. The bull was delivered to Eurystheus, who, upon seeing it, cowered behind a pillar and ordered it released. It was set free near Marathon, where its story would continue, but its fury, once divine, had been broken not by force, but by patience. The eighth labor pulled Heracles far from the olive groves of Greece to the savage plains of Thrace, where Diomedes, son of Ares, ruled with blood and bone. His pride lay not in wealth or temple, but in his horses. 4 monstrous mares fed on human flesh. Their breath reeked of gore, their eyes gleamed red, and their hooves struck sparks when they moved. Diomedes housed them in bronze-fenced stables by the sea, where their shrieks echoed across the tide and no man dared draw near. Strangers were seized and thrown to the beasts, torn apart as entertainment. Heracles' arrival was unannounced. He came by night, accompanied by a small band of companions, all silent, all grim. They crept through the mist and reached the stables before dawn. Heracles pried open the gates, and the mares snarled, the air filled with the sound of metal scraping bone. But before they could attack, Heracles turned toward the palace. Diomedes was already riding to meet him, armed and armored, flanked by guards. The confrontation was immediate. Steel clashed in the half-light, Heracles wielding his club with precision and fury, his companions fending off the soldiers. Diomedes fought like the son of war, quick, brutal, relentless. But Heracles was unshaken. He drove the king back, step by step, and finally struck him down in the dust. He did not speak. He did not look back. Then he dragged Diomedes' body to the stables and flung it before the mares. They sniffed, they paced, and then they fed. The curse that lived within them seemed to break with each bite. Their eyes lost their red glow, their breathing slowed. No longer beasts of nightmare, they became silent, watchful animals, dangerous still, but no longer mad. Heracles calmed them, yoked them, and led them back across the wild lands and mountains. Along the way, they obeyed. They did not stray. The villagers who had once feared them gathered by the roadsides, watching in awe as monsters passed with heads bowed. Eurystheus accepted the mares with shaking hands and sent them away immediately. Some say they were freed in the sacred pastures of Hera, left to wander until their hoofprints faded. Others claim Heracles sacrificed them in honor of the gods, offering peace in place of blood. Either way, their terror ended with him. In these 2 labors, Heracles did not slaughter his foes outright. He subdued them. He outlasted and outthought. Where others would have raised swords, he raised restraint, and so the legend deepened, not of a man who killed what he feared, but of one who faced what others could not and endured. The 9th labor sent Heracles east, into a land ruled not by kings or monsters, but by warrior women. The Amazons were a people apart, fierce, self-sufficient, bound by discipline and boundless in pride. They lived without men, raised their daughters to wield spear and bow, and held council in temples to Artemis. Their queen, Hippolyta, wore a girdle of gold and leather, a symbol of her right to lead, gifted to her by Ares, god of war. Eurystheus wanted that girdle, not for himself, but for his daughter. And so, Heracles sailed toward the Black Sea, into the unknown. The journey took weeks. The sky turned colder, the wind shifted. When the ship reached the coast, Heracles disembarked alone, walking beneath pines that whispered in a language not his own. At the gates of Themyscira, the Amazon capital, he met Hippolyta not as an enemy, but as an equal. She descended from her stone throne with quiet strength and listened as he spoke. Heracles did not beg nor threaten. He explained. A labor, not a conquest. A request, not a demand. The queen considered him in silence. Then, unexpectedly, she agreed. She would give the girdle, not as a prize, but as a gesture of respect. But the gods are seldom content with peace. Hera, ever hostile, spread whispers among the Amazons. Heracles had come to steal their queen, to enslave them. Panic spread. Spears were raised, drums beat like thunder. By the time Heracles sensed the change, it was too late. The Amazons attacked, believing betrayal had already begun. Heracles fought back, reluctantly but necessarily. Arrows hissed, swords rang. Amid the chaos, Hippolyta was struck down, not by Heracles, but by her own sisters, blinded by fear. When the dust settled, the queen was gone, and the girdle lay bloodied in the grass. Heracles took it with silent grief, returned to his ship, and sailed away. The girdle passed into Eurystheus's hands. The memory of Themyscira passed into legend. The 10th labor pushed Heracles farther than ever before, across deserts and salt plains, to the edge of the world itself. There, in the land of Erythea, lived Geryon, a giant with 3 torsos, 3 heads, 3 shields, and 1 soul. He ruled from a red island beyond the Great Sea, where crimson cattle grazed in endless herds. These were not gentle animals. They were guarded by a giant herdsman named Eurytion, and a hound with 2 heads, Orthrus, as ferocious as Cerberus. Heracles was to retrieve the cattle and return them home. No maps showed the way. No stars offered guidance. He wandered for days under an unrelenting sun, and at its peak, exhausted and scorched, he lifted his bow and fired an arrow into the sky, cursing Helios for his fury. The sun god, amused by this mortal's defiance, did not strike. Instead, he gave Heracles a gift, a golden cup, large enough to carry him across the sea. Heracles accepted it with gratitude and sailed west, the cup gliding silently across waves the color of ink. On Erythea, Orthrus saw him first. The hound charged, teeth bared, but Heracles met it with a single strike. Eurytion followed, axe raised, and fell soon after. The cattle scattered, their hooves shaking the ground. Then Geryon came, armored and vast, each of his bodies moving in deadly harmony. The battle shook the cliffs. Heracles fought not 3 men, but one being divided into many forms. He aimed his bow and struck all 3 hearts, and the giant fell like a crumbling mountain. The return journey was no less perilous. Hera, still unyielding, sent gadflies to torment the cattle. They scattered across plains and rivers, and Heracles spent days recovering them. At one point, he built a great pillar to separate Europe from Africa, a marker of his path. what would later be known as the Pillars of Heracles. At last, he arrived in Mycenae, driving the crimson herd before him. Eurystheus accepted the labor, trembling as he did, and immediately ordered the cattle sacrificed to Hera. These two tasks were not simply tests of strength or stamina. They were acts of patience, of endurance, of sorrow. Heracles had crossed boundaries no mortal had crossed before, across sea, into myth, and back again, bringing with him not just cattle or girdles, but stories the world had never known. His body bore scars. His eyes saw farther. The man who returned was not the one who had left. He carried not just proof of labor, but the weight of what each one cost. The 11th labor sent Heracles westward, farther than he had ever gone, in search of golden apples said to hang in the garden of the gods. These were no ordinary fruits. They shimmered like stars, glowing with divine light, and were said to grant longevity, even immortality. Hera had received the orchard as a wedding gift. Her daughters, the Hesperides, tended the trees, aided by Ladon, a serpent with 100 heads whose eyes never closed. The garden's location was unknown, hidden beyond Oceanus, at the very edge of the world. No man knew the way. Heracles wandered for weeks, crossing deserts, mountain passes, and coastlines, asking those who remembered the old roads. In Libya, he met Antaeus, a giant who challenged all travelers to wrestle. Antaeus drew strength from the earth itself. So long as his feet touched the ground, he could not be beaten. Heracles, seeing the secret, lifted the giant and crushed him mid-air. The ground did not answer his cry. Still, the path to the apples remained hidden. At the edge of the sea, Heracles found Nereus, the shape-shifting old man of the deep. He seized him and held fast as Nereus twisted into beast, flame, storm. At last, exhausted, the old god relented. The apples, he said, lay beyond the western ocean, where the sun dipped below the world, and only Atlas knew the way. So Heracles traveled farther still, past lands where the sky pressed close, and even the trees grew quiet. There, at the edge of the horizon, he found Atlas, the Titan who held up the sky. The stars leaned low above him, his shoulders trembling under heaven's weight. Heracles offered him a bargain. If Atlas would fetch the apples, he would bear the sky in his place. Atlas agreed. When Heracles stepped beneath the sky, it fell on him like a silent avalanche. It was not just weight, but timelessness, stars, pressure, silence. He stood without moving, his arms locked, his breath shallow. Atlas, free for the first time in ages, moved swiftly. He reached the garden, scattered the Hesperides, and struck down Ladon with a swing of his hand. He returned with 3 golden apples, pulsing with warmth. But he was not eager to return to his burden. "I will take these to Eurystheus myself," Atlas said. "You may remain here." Still beneath the sky, Heracles nodded. "Very well. But would you hold the heavens again, just for a moment, so I may adjust my cloak?" Atlas agreed. The moment the sky passed back to the Titan's shoulders, Heracles gathered the apples and walked away. Atlas shouted after him, but the heavens pinned him where he stood. Heracles never looked back. The final labor would not send Heracles farther, but deeper, into the underworld. Eurystheus, seeking the impossible, demanded that he bring back Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No weapon, no trickery. The beast was to be taken whole, with strength alone. Heracles descended through the cave at Tanarum, where the earth cracked like a wound. Shadows thickened. The air fell still. The dead stirred, but did not speak. At the banks of the Styx, Charon waited. He said nothing, only raised his pole and ferried Heracles across the black. In the halls of Hades, Persephone sat beside her husband. Heracles bowed low. Hades regarded him calmly. "If you can subdue Cerberus without blade or chain," he said, "you may take him." Heracles nodded and walked deeper toward the gates of shadow. Cerberus waited. The beast loomed, 3 heads growling in staggered rhythm, fur coarse as iron, tail curled like a whip. Each mouth bared rows of fangs, each set of eyes locked on Heracles. The ground trembled beneath its paws. Heracles stepped forward. The creature lunged. They collided in silence. He wrestled not just muscle, but fury. Each head bit and tore, the tail lashing wildly, but Heracles held firm. He gripped the beast at the necks, pinned it with his weight, and did not release. Slowly, breath by breath, the snarls softened. The monster stilled. Heracles placed his hands on the collar and led it upward. They passed through caverns of ash and root, past spirits who watched from the cracks. When they emerged into daylight, the sky itself seemed to pause. Eurystheus, seeing the beast, screamed and hid in a jar, begging Heracles to return it at once. He did. Cerberus vanished back into the dark. 12 labors. Some contested, others denied, but all endured. Heracles had crossed deserts, oceans, skies, and death. He had survived what kings feared, what gods dismissed. He returned with no crown, only memory. He spoke less. He looked further. The labors had carved him, not with fire, but with time, strain, and the long, quiet practice of carrying weight others would not. The 12 labors were finished. Heracles had crossed the sea, the sky, the underworld. He had bent rivers, slain beasts, and outwitted gods. He had returned from where no man was meant to go, not once, but many times. But when the final task was marked complete, when the golden apples had been delivered and Cerberus returned to the shadows, no trumpet sounded. There were no crowds, no coronation. Eurystheus, the king who had set the labors, offered no feast, no gold. He simply declared the hero free, as if releasing a servant from duty. Heracles did not protest. He did not ask for reward. He bowed once and turned to leave. He had grown quiet over those years. The man who began this journey with rage in his heart now spoke gently, walked slowly. The tasks had stripped him down, task by task, beast by beast, until all that remained was endurance itself. And when the chains of obligation fell away, he did not rush to reclaim status or fame. He wandered. Some say he returned to Thebes, his home of origin, but did not stay. Others claim he roamed the land like a storm with no rain, visiting temples, lifting fallen stones, calming frightened towns. Wherever he walked, people recognized him, not always by face but by silence. Children said he moved like a mountain on 2 legs. Elders offered him bread without asking his name. The gods were quiet too. They had seen something shift. He had completed the tasks they thought would break him. He had endured exile, madness, loss. He had obeyed, but he had also defied. And in doing so, he had become something even Olympus could not ignore. He wandered into myths beyond the labors. In one, he joined Jason and the Argonauts on their voyage. In another, he descended again into the underworld, not for glory, but to rescue a friend from death's grip. His strength remained, but it was no longer the first thing people saw. They noticed his stillness now, the way he listened. But fate was not finished with him. In time, Heracles found himself in the service of another king, a man named Eurytus, whose daughter, Iole, had once caught Heracles' eye. Eurytus refused to let his daughter marry the hero, fearing his temper, his past. Heracles left in peace, But pride does not dissolve easily. A feud followed. Some say he took Iole anyway. Some say he was tricked into it. Regardless, a battle came, and with it, another tragedy. Heracles' wife, Deianira, fearing he loved another, sent him a robe dipped in the blood of the centaur Nessus, who had once tried to carry her off. Nessus, dying, had whispered that his blood would bind Heracles' love to her forever. But centaur blood is no charm, it is poison. When Heracles put on the robe, it burned, not like fire, like betrayal, like venom crawling under skin. He tore at it, tried to rip it free, but it clung to him, fused to flesh. His skin blistered, cracked. Even his strength could not remove it, and still he did not cry out. He climbed Mount Oeta, step by step, with the robe still burning, and gathered wood for his own funeral pyre. At the summit, he lay down upon it, breathing heavily. No wind stirred, no bird sang. He asked his friend Philoctetes to light the fire. At first, the man refused. Heracles insisted. With shaking hands, the torch was raised. Flames caught quickly, feeding on pine and pitch. The sky did not thunder. The gods did not speak. But when the fire rose high, some say they saw a figure step free from it, no longer bent by pain, no longer wrapped in mortal skin. A new Heracles, radiant and whole, climbed skyward. Zeus himself welcomed him to Olympus, not as a guest, as kin, as God. There, among the immortals, Heracles took his place. He was given ambrosia, crowned with constellations, and married to Hebe, goddess of youth. Yet even there, they say, he remained different. He did not sit long at banquets. He walked the edges of Olympus, watching the world below, perhaps remembering. On earth, stories of him never ceased. They changed shape, tone, direction, but they endured. Some told of his strength, others of his sorrow. Still others whispered of the way he changed people, how his silence made others speak more honestly, how his presence quieted chaos. And in time, the tales softened. He was no longer just a hero who killed monsters or bent mountains. He became a symbol of what it means to struggle, to fall, to rise again. Not perfectly, not without scars, but with purpose. The 12 labors were over, but the myth walked on.